Welcome, everyone. I'm Tim Masson. I am the Chief Steward and CEO of Raise Recruiting. And we're here to talk today about self-management, operating your organization without managers. So hopefully that is a fun and exciting and controversial topic for everyone, and that we can have a good time here together today. So adopting self-management, a practical framework for increasing employee engagement and business results in an unpredictable world. I've got a panel of speakers here joining me this morning, and so I'm just going to introduce them before we get going. So if you want to, Shelly, can you introduce yourself first?
Sure, Shelley Hull here. I am a recent addition to the Ian Martin and Ray's recruiting family, and also new to staffing. And I joined as the director of marketing in the fall of last year. Excited to join in this conversation.
And Michael?
Thanks, Tim. My name is Michael Lacey. I'm the Chief Sales Officer and Executive Vice President for Raise Recruiting. I've been in the staffing industry for over 25 years, worked all over North America, and have been with Raise Recruiting for over the last 10 years. Excited to be here to talk about this topic.
And Anissa?
Hi, everyone. My name is Anissa. I am a senior recruiter account manager. I've been at Raise for about 5 years, but have been in staffing for over 8 years at this point. Really excited to be here and meet you all today.
And for many of you, I guess I'll just introduce our company quickly as well. Our company was initially called the Ian Martin Group until just this year. We've been around for about 65 years in the industry. We have about 5,000 contractors, about the scale of our organization. We've been rebranding as Raise Recruiting because I think, as you'll see, we're really looking at the next several decades of innovation in the industry, and we want to be a part of that transformation. So we're heavily involved right now in helping clients innovate around direct sourcing, and a number of other programs that have been really exciting. But that's not what the topic is today. The topic today is about the strange and unusual way that we operate. And that's called self-management. And we kind of have this, why self-management? Why would you join the session? Why would you even think about this for your business? And really the question is kind of in the midst of the Great Resignation and a global pandemic, doesn't your business need engaged employees and an adaptive operating model? We found, and just to give you a quick story or a quick anecdote, at the start of the pandemic, I think as leaders of staffing companies, we were all scared, to be honest, about what the future was going to hold. I think many of us anyway, myself certainly. But we had been operating in this self-managing model that we're going to tell you about for a period of time. And really what we said to our teams is the absolute last thing we're going to do is let people go. But we need 500 people in the company to think like owners, to think like CEOs, and figure out other ways that we can reduce costs, and also creative ways that we can pivot and increase revenues and find clients that we can serve that are still active during this time, especially during the initial lockdowns in March 2020. And incredibly, people leaned in so hard. We were able to find expense reductions, dramatic expense reductions, so that we were more profitable through the pandemic, especially in those early months when business was declining. And then we found some amazing client opportunities that were kind of unprecedented in our company's history. And those combined with our traditional organic growth, like stunningly, we've actually been able to double our revenues since just 2 years ago, the start of the pandemic. And so, when we're talking about this model that we're operating today, the biggest reason we think it's awesome is that it's just better for people. It's better for people that work in the organization. It creates a more meaningful experience of work. But once you get it implemented and people are really operating in this way and in this mindset, it's better for business too. And it's far more adaptive. And we've seen those results through the pandemic. So it's been exciting. And we kind of each are kind of playing a bit of a role here today. So I'm going to be facilitating. And then we brought along folks that kind of represent different types of employee groups as we've gone through this transition from, a traditionally managed organization that's been around for 65 years to one that's now operating in self-management. And so Michael Lacey is kind of the former manager. He's been here a long time, and he went through that transition on that side. Anissa is, we call it the former non-manager. So she wasn't working as a manager and has still gone through the transition. And to be honest, has taken on a lot of initiatives and a lot of things, from her position in self-management that a manager might have done in the past. So she'll tell you more about that. And then people often ask us, like, how do people come into the company? How do they adjust to this? It's so unusual compared to the way other companies operate. So we brought Shelley Hull along, who's our new director of marketing, and she joined us about 3 or 4 months ago. And so what she can talk to you about and tell some stories about is just what the experience is like of transitioning into our company from another organization. So our goal is to spend only about, let's say, 10 minutes just presenting our system to you and kind of giving you a little context on how it works. And then we want to open it really for Q&A for you guys to talk to the folks on the panel and learn what you can, make the session valuable for you. All right. Let me just change slides here. Okay. So first, why does this work? Well, actually, it's based on real behavioral science. So really, most people, we'll see on the left here, this guy with a stick and a carrot, most businesses believe that that's the way that you manage people. You give them carrots, you give them sticks. Rewards and punishments in our industry, it's commission plans and, hammering them with when they don't meet their metrics. And what Dan Pink started to find in the early 2000s, he published the book Drive, which is really about motivation and meaningful work and results in a creative knowledge worker type setting. What he found is that actually that carrots and sticks are not the most powerful way for people to be motivated. Instead, the most powerful motivator is what he calls intrinsic motivation. So that kind of feeling of, I just love to do it, the feeling you get when you do your hobbies or play your sports. We can all experience that at work. It's just a matter of how our work is organized and how things are set up. And so Dan Pink basically said that there's 3 things that somebody needs to experience intrinsic motivation in their work. And they're here on the right-hand side. They need autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And so, as we started to realize that, and our whole company's purpose is really around connecting people in meaningful work, we really focused on this model. And so first, every organization where people experience mastery, they need to learn to do the job well, they need to learn how to do it effectively. And really almost every company that's effective and efficient across the world creates opportunities for staff to develop mastery. The next one is purpose. And this is what we've really seen innovation in companies over the last, 20 to 30 years, I would say, inspiring brands, Apple being about thinking different, or Tesla, creating the opportunity to kind of transform the world's transportation and green our infrastructure. When companies have an inspiring purpose, then people attach to them. And Simon Sinek talked about start with why, and just the power of that attraction of having a meaningful why. So many companies have started to implement this. I wouldn't say most, but kind of like 20%, 30% of companies at this point have really made an effort there. But the last piece, autonomy, if you think about that, that is the most difficult thing to implement in a functioning organization, right? If everyone in the organization has autonomy, doesn't that mean we'll end up with chaos? And so this is the area where once we had the first 2 in place as an organization, we've really focused in order to make sure that people can have the maximum experience of meaningful work, which also means maximum engagement and in the long run, maximum business performance. Because again, knowledge workers actually aren't motivated by carrots and sticks. That's a false belief. The truth is they're intrinsically motivated, but you need to give them control of their work and autonomy in order to unlock the power of intrinsic motivation. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so at our company, and this is a multi-year process, we kind of started experimenting first with a small team, and then we kind of like semi-perfected the model we were going to operate, and then eventually scaled it up to the whole organization of 500 people. So all told, it probably took us about 5 or 6 years to figure out how to implement this self-managing system. We call it the Teal operating system. There's one book that uses kind of a color-coded system to talk about the way different companies operate. And so Teal represents kind of self-management. So you can think of those 2 terms as interchangeable. But yeah, so really, we were kind of iterating and experimenting, and we were really honestly like creating a path. I think that for organizations to implement this now, if they were serious about it, would take 2 to 3 years with the resources and tools that are out there and available now. But at the time, we started this almost a decade ago, we were really cutting the path and trying to create this innovation. So in a lot of ways, we've replaced managers with this flow chart. And the set of principles that we have on the left. So everyone in the company, rather than having managers, it's almost like everyone has the authority or the opportunity to be and act and think like a manager. And just kind of reading the bullets on the side, everyone in the company has the freedom to tackle or own any problem and opportunity that they see. And if you care about it, then you can take responsibility for fixing or changing it. So if you don't like the company's benefits plan, then you actually have the authority to start to take initiative to make a change to that, rather than just complaining or whining about it. And there's myriad other issues, like what is our office location? Where are we renting space? Are we renting space? And then multiple things. And as we've gone along, we have this principle that says the person who's closest to the issue or most impacted is the one who makes the decision. But first, they need to get advice and perspective from others who are either impacted or who have experience or expertise in that area. So rather than consensus, it's like the person who's taking the initiative is the CEO of the decision. They can drive it forward and lead that particular decision. And if you kind of take this to its furthest extent, that means, who is the most impacted by a role, the person's role definition, or the person's compensation, or the person's the team that they work with. And the truth is that it's that individual who is. So we actually have HR processes now that have been set up where individuals can self-manage their compensation setting or their role definition through getting the advice from other people. And then lastly, actually in the most healthy, well-functioning organizations, Patrick Lencioni, who wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is really all about building strong and healthy teams, said that at the base, we have to create the base of our relationships. We have to create trust. And then the next most important thing in order to be a healthy, functioning group or team is actually to have conflict, to be able to disagree in a healthy way about business ideas and moving the business forward. And so in our company, we've had to establish norms really around teaching people to give and receive feedback. That's not a habit that we're generally taught in society or in school. So that's a big thing we've spent time training on. And then if folks get really stuck in conflict, we've trained kind of peer facilitators in the organization to help people work things through. So you can kind of see everything I just described is actually the flow chart on the right. So when people come into our company, we teach them, this flow chart, your initiative is your manager, and this flow chart is what you use in order to get stuff done in the organization. So you can see, you notice a problem and opportunity, you decide if it's worth pursuing, and then there's kind of 3 categories. The yellow one on the right is kind of any types of decisions. There's 2 decision types that we have. One is called an advice process. So that's where the decision isn't going to ask other people to change their behavior or affect them directly. So that's, you want to make a major purchase, or you want to, make some other initiative, then you just get advice from others and you make the decision and move that forward. If you're asking folks to change their behavior, commit to certain, standards or a practice or a policy, then we need their consent. And so that's where we basically make a proposal and we ask for people to agree to that proposal. So that's how we make decisions. That's covers most of the thing. And then in the middle, kind of that teal section is all the HR processes. So we've basically replaced those with templated versions of the advice process that people can run. And then lastly, as I mentioned, where there's conflict, the blue side on the left is we have a feedback and a conflict resolution process that we can help support people with. So all of these tools, this resource is publicly available on our website. The current link is teal.ianmartin.com. And you can go there and you can download all the templates and resources and materials that we use to run this system. All right, and then, yeah, so that's a description of the whole thing. And I'm going to start off. So we are excited to have Q&A for the rest of the time. I'm going to start with one question for our panel, and then it's going to be up to you guys to put some questions in after that. And Jacob and I will kind of track those and make sure that they get asked to the team, to the panel. So again, Shelley, Michael, and Anissa, for you guys, what is the best thing about operating this way, and what's been the hardest about learning or transitioning to this model of working? Could you guys maybe each answer that for us? Who wants to start? Shelley, seems like you're ready to go.
Always ready to go. For me, especially being fairly new and coming from a very traditionally run organization, a big thing that I really liked and was almost shocked was through how structured the feedback process is. I really like that there is a process through which we give regular feedback, so that it's the norm and not the thing you do, once or twice or three times a year with a boss, but you're doing it in the moment. It's expected. So, you can get off a call with a colleague and both know like that went horribly. And the next time you connect, it could end up in a bit of a feedback conversation between the two of you. And it's a natural thing to do, even when the conversations can be difficult. And I do have a deep appreciation for that.
Awesome. Michael, you want to go?
Yeah, Tim, I always like to start with the negative and end with the positive. So I'm going to start with the hardest part about self-management. And for me, it was really about not being able to be that final decision maker for all things under kind of my responsibility. As I mentioned, I'm a 25-year veteran of the staffing industry. I loved making those decisions, especially difficult ones. And I like to think I was actually pretty good at it. But if we were going to make self-management a reality in our organization, we needed to show all the employees that we were serious about it. And so really, what did we do? All of us in management and executive roles, we gave up our positional authority. Externally, we all have titles, but inside the organization, we all became advisors to employees. And so what that meant was that we were there to help support those decisions for them. The best thing about self-management is really the way that we do make decisions throughout the organization. We moved from what was considered that command and control, top down, to really a bottom up approach where everyone, as Tim mentioned, everyone in the company can now make decisions. Tim outlined earlier through our operating system, we developed those processes to provide a framework so that every employee who identifies a problem or opportunity can be a decision maker. And really, the process is simple. Once you identify that problem or opportunity, you gather a group of advisors who are close to the issues, gather their advice, present the issue. Advisors can ask questions, provide reactions, and then the decision maker presents their proposal or a revised proposal. And ultimately, those advisors agree or disagree. And so the one thing is the process might take a little bit more time up front, but I will say the outcomes are better, well thought out. And as these decisions are implemented, they get implemented quicker because there's a lot more buy-in to that whole decision process.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mike. Okay, Anissa.
Yeah, so I think as someone who developed our onboarding and sponsorship program for all of our new hires coming into the organization, I'd say that the hardest thing about operating in a self-managed way is teaching our common practices to new hires, especially to those candidates that come from companies where they've already been in leadership roles. And I think to give away your managerial authority realistically does come with difficulty for some, and to not only have to walk them through their role and training, but also teaching them the basics on how we operate. I think that can sometimes be a bit challenging and something that people do struggle with in the initial first few months. But the best thing about operating, I think, in a self-managed way for me is that sort of engaged workforce. So you're involved in the decision-making process. And in other companies that haven't yet adopted the concept of self-managed and that way of working, sometimes a decision is often made for you, right, by your managers or your bosses. But at Raise, through the common practices that we've had the opportunity to develop, there is a room for you and your coworkers to sort of equally contribute and come up with a decision if you feel close to that problem and wanting to be a part of it. So I love that part about operating in the Teal setting.
All right, that's cool. So, and guys, maybe you guys can just show me with your hand which one of you wants to take this question. But Victor from Manpower is asking, is meaningful work a valid framework even if you haven't achieved mastery, or is mastery a critical first step to deploy this approach? Somehow magically that appeared on the screen, which is amazing.
Meaningful
work.
I mean, I could take a stab at it, and
go ahead, Shelley.
Everybody can jump in as they want to. I don't think for work to be meaningful, it has to be something you've mastered. I think the definition of meaningful work in itself is very personal. So what I define meaningful work to be is going to be different from my colleagues on the panel and from those of you who are here attending this discussion. So I think when your work is meaningful, you try to achieve mastery in it because it is something that fits a purpose for you. So you are working towards something that does mean or has an impact. You're going to want to be exceptional at it. So I hope that answers it, but I don't know that you have to be a master at what you're doing in order for it to mean something or have purpose.
I'm going to add one thing in here too. Thank you, Shelley. That's awesome. That's coming to mind for me, which is that that actually meaningful work, meaning itself, is subjective. So it's defined by the person. And what we found is we found a book called Primed to Perform, which is also about all this stuff to do with intrinsic motivation and performance. And we extracted a simplified model from that book, which is again, it's kind of a 3-circle diagram where meaningful work is the intersection of what the business needs, what you're good at, and what you're motivated by, or you feel play or intrinsic motivation or connection to, right? And so the truth is that meaningful work is actually quite fluid. And it's almost impossible for the executives or the managers in the company, maybe easier for the managers and even harder for the executives to kind of dictate meaningful work for people, because that one component, which is what people are motivated by, is constantly changing. And the reason it's constantly changing is because people are constantly mastering new things. So they go from being challenging and exciting to being kind of routine. I'm good at it, but it's kind of boring, right? And often that's where people end up, is like, I'm really good at this thing and it's good for the business, but it's not challenging or motivating for me anymore, right? And so what our organization allows people to do is own their own role definition process. So they're still responsible to go out and find out what the business needs are from, whatever other people, whether that's former managers and executives and experienced folks or different people in the organization. That's a part of the process, but they're the ones who define their role. So they know what's going to be challenging and meaningful and engaging for them at the next stage of their career. And they're able to articulate what they're good at. And we have a structured process by which people do that, so that it becomes the responsibility of individuals to define their role and constantly be checking themselves to make sure that their work is meaningful and is also making a positive impact in moving the business forward. So hopefully that helps. I think mastery is an ever evolving thing, and folks can master something, at an entry level and then continue to grow their career. And, I think there's a couple of other questions about retention, but I think this is the most amazing retention program ever. Like, we have people working here. We have one very senior person who would change careers every 2 years, because that person was bored. And then she came and worked here, and now she's been here about 6 years. And literally, she's changed her career still every 2 years because she gets bored, but she's done it within our organization. And so as a retention strategy, we're the first company that's been able to retain her talent, even though she has been able to actually change her role. And so again, this gives that's the way that this works in terms of retention. Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna transition to the next question. Here is actually about so it's from Leo Petrelli, and he's mentioning about being an alcoholic in long-term recovery. But I think we've talked a lot about this in our organization as well, and I'll just extend it maybe for the panel to just think about mental health in general. So his question is really, is engaged employees are sober employees, but engaged, I could maybe translate that or broaden it to engaged employees are healthy employees. And maybe you guys could just talk about the connection between sort of mental health, what we've experienced and seen, and how our system intersects with that.
Well, that's an interesting question. Got to think about this one.
I don't mind sharing if no one else has anything to, because I joined Raise at the kind of breaking point of being with an organization where my mental health was not good, and it hadn't been so for probably about 2 years. And in the first few months of joining, I had some serious personal things happen in terms of family and illness. And in working in a self-managed company, being able to have a team that was very respectful of self, being able to express without being vulnerable within a space that I felt comfortable about in order to share, and having people around you who helped navigate the day-to-day, as well as understanding the person before, like you are a person before you are someone that is working at a job, made managing a lot of that very on in joining a new company and, pandemic, it actually helped to alleviate a lot of the stress that I was still carrying, as well as the new stresses that have been added. And part of that is when you are self-managing, there's a responsibility to self and others. So it's not just about managing your own feelings, your own emotions, and the things that are going on with you, but actually being reflective enough to understand the impact on others based on those situations and how those behaviors may be expressed. And through that sharing, I am working with a phenomenal group of people, very, very fortunate. But I imagine what it would have been like navigating that where I was. And, I couldn't have even fathomed how I would have gotten through, that kind of 2-month stretch where, I had to kind of be in and out, and you're like, I'm in a new job, they're going to fire me, and none of those things ever felt like they would be a reality. It was, I'm being trusted to get my work done and, giving the space to manage my mental health the way I needed to in dealing with personal things, but also managing my job. So I think, this is a really timely question, and, we're all dealing with extra stresses in the day-to-day. So, being able to tap into yourself as well as reflect and communicate, I think is such a big piece of how we work and where we work.
Mike, do you want to jump in here?
Well, that's a real hard response to follow up on, but I'll try at least, which is, this has been, 2 years, actually almost over 2 years now with the pandemic, and it has been hard on all employees on a worldwide scale. I don't think we really know what the results will be as we come out of this. But I will say that within this organization with Raise, is typically it would be the company who would be thinking about the resources required to help our employees. But a number of employees took it on themselves to really go and do research and actually understand what kind of resources were available in the market and brought that to the organization. And we implemented some strategies. We also partnered with an organization really to provide all the needed resources that our employees would require. So again, from a self-management perspective, the employees took this on, but really we're really thinking about the rest of the employees and what they could do to help support them during this time.
It's just such an important topic. I want to make sure. Anissa, are you good, or do you want to add anything here?
I'm good. Mike and Shelley, you did a great job.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go to Tom Hadley's question. So Tom is asking, staff retention is a big challenge here in the UK. What would you recommend as quick wins for organizations looking to stem the flow of key staff in the short term while also looking at the longer term approach? So can you guys think, if you were going to take a component of our system and recommend it for Tom as a quick win, is there something that he could look at?
I could take that on. I think there's really two quick wins you could look at. First is implementing feedback throughout your organization and put in a process that allows employees to really provide feedback when necessary. The one thing that we found within our organization before we did this, a lot of misconceptions, a lot of issues kind of were there, but they just festered because nobody had the tools to actually provide that necessary feedback loop that's required. And so we implemented that. It's not very difficult to do. It's kind of a multi-step process, but honestly, it just gives every individual, rather than taking feedback from a personal perspective, it just logically outlines exactly the approach to take. Number two, I also think it's the advice process. The advice process is actually quite simple, and really it can be done in that traditional staffing organization where the teams or the individuals are empowered to kind of identify problems and opportunities, follow that process, and really give them some of those decision-making tools and abilities. And I really believe those are two quick wins that you could do that really empowers your employees overall.
And just to add to that, my next slide at the very end, I'm going to give you, if you guys stick around, I'll give you some books and references that you can do, and some of the tools that Mike referenced are on that screen. What I don't have on that screen that I would highly recommend is like a quick thing to do is we've worked with an author and speaker called Tim Arnold, and he's written a book called Lead with And, which is the idea of kind of managing healthy tensions in the world that we're living in and in business. But he is an expert and engaging facilitator. He used to work with us doing company offsites and making them fun and engaging and really interactive for people. And he's taken that experience to online. So what I would kind of recommend, just in terms of getting people re-engaged and connected online, is he's able to teach the content around healthy tensions, also able to teach the content that Mike mentioned around giving and receiving feedback, but make it super fun in an online context. And so like, I think that'd be the simplest thing to do. And certainly my email is available at the end, Tom. So if you want to email me, I can make that connection for you. Anything, Shelley, Anissa, you guys want to add, or should we go to the next question? Good, okay. All right, this is a killer question from Kathleen Harris at the Focus Talent Solutions. So how hard was it to get all of the leaders aboard? Did you have any turnover due to this?
Do you want me to take that?
Sure, Mike, you're the former manager. Why don't you tell us?
It was hard, Kathleen, really hard. And it was more of a mindset shift than anything else. And so to answer your question, we did not have any turnover initially. I think everybody conceptually got on board with the idea that this was kind of where we wanted to take this organization. We needed to and wanted to be a very different type of staffing organization. And we saw this as a real unique benefit, that we could deliver results on behalf of our clients. But over time, there was definitely a few I would call leaders who just really had a hard time getting understanding the processes, but most importantly, just didn't appreciate of where the organization was going. And so it was really difficult when they had to give up that decision-making authority. They liked it. They appreciated, they liked that traditional model of command and control. And eventually they decided this wasn't the place for them, and eventually found a better place for them that fit their career aspirations. So yes, it was hard, but I would say it was very limited, the amount of turnover we had overall.
Yeah.
Anissa, I want to, yeah, perfect. You're gonna speak, because I really want to hear your perspective on this.
I was just going to add to that and say, from the perspective of people who are non-managers as well, which maybe you're interested in hearing about, we have so many foundational skills such as psychological safety, where we have generous listening and equal talking time, or the concept of feedback that Mike just brought up, where we actually have a step-by-step process of explaining SBI, which is situation, behavior, and impact, and then TIR, thanking them for feedback. all of these tools that we've developed over the years have really helped those that aren't in manager roles provide feedback to those that maybe did come from a previous manager position. And so I think that that's really been helpful from our perspective to have these genuine, wholesome, meaningful discussions with people that may have a leadership or managerial background, and allow them to, just have, I think, a genuine conversation about, okay, what's been going on, what's wrong, what can we do to work together and move forward. And so I think both managers and non-managers have worked together using some of the foundation skills that we've developed really well.
That's awesome. Thank you, Anita. Yeah, or Anissa, my bad. I do that all the time. I work closely as well with Anita and Anissa. I think that one thing is when you look at this flow chart, it engages your intellectual brain. So we call that, it's at a head level, it's easy to understand. But then when we talk about leadership or adjusting to this model, there's kind of like, getting your head on board with it. And that's not so hard. And then kind of getting your heart on board with it. Like, do I really believe, or what are my beliefs? Do I believe that actually everyone is capable, that everyone wants to do the right thing, that everyone is smart, that everyone has the organization's best interest at heart? So it's really about kind of the head, heart, and then habit. And habits are hard to change. We know that so if you're Mike and you've been used to just being the one to make the decisions without consulting others, or myself, it's how do I adopt the habits? How do I change the way that I interact with people? So kind of needs to go from that process. Like intellectually, I get it, and now I'm starting to change my heart, change my beliefs, and then change what I actually do. And that's a process that folks go through, and I think is necessary in order to be successful. Okay, cool, great question. Thank you, Kathleen. So I'm going to go to Jamie Herbert from Capstone IT. So Jamie has two questions. Okay, may have missed it. Can you share a bit of context, organizational size, and when the shift started versus today? And how do you determine the readiness of the org for this shift? Okay, I'm going to take that one because it's kind of practical. The company has about 500 employees. Sort of globally, we have teams in India, we have teams in Ghana and Africa, we have teams in the Philippines, we have teams in the US, and teams in Canada. So we're big-ish. To give you an idea of our size, we have about 5,000 contractors, and additional about a third of our business or a quarter of our business is perm placement. So we're a decent size. And the second question is really about readiness. And I think that the biggest thing around readiness is that the leaders or leader has to be ready to kind of start to go through that head, heart, habit process. So if as a leader, you're doing this, let's say you're the CEO or the owner of the business, you're making this change or transition only because it's going to improve business results, you won't make it all the way there. You kind of have to believe that it and care that it's more worthwhile and valuable for people, as long as the business results are at least the same, that you're going to have a more meaningful and engaged workplace. And that's a gift to the world. And it's worth the effort on that basis. And then in our case, what we've seen is that it's led to making that commitment has led to dramatically better business results. And so that's been a huge blessing. But I think that in terms of readiness, the organization at some level won't be ready, but what we've done is create a pathway, a series of steps. So when we started this, we were doing it with almost no guidance. Now, kind of the literature is much more robust than it was before. And I'm actually offering, I'll offer at the end, I'm offering to support other founders, CEOs, and owners of businesses to think about making this change and transition, and even supporting owners in exits of their businesses. So I really want to scale this because I think across our industry, I want people to love their work more. And I think that's the biggest thing that'll make a difference in the world. Going back to the question about sort of mental health and engagement. So yeah, you got to do it because you feel it matters. Okay, so Joe Leaders from Adecco is asking, I'm loving hearing about this because it's how I work, and I see it very, very beneficial for establishing the feelings of value for employees and individual growth, raising exponentially. Okay, cool. So just a comment there. I guess I didn't follow whether it was a question. Give me one more second to figure out. Yes, okay. There's a question from Lori Mallet from Hatch about a book. So I'm going to give you some specific books around implementing self-management. But there's another book I mentioned called Primed to Perform, P-R-I-M-E-D, to Perform, P-E-R-F-O-R-M. And I can't remember the authors right now. But that book really is very specific around like HR practices and engagement of employees and kind of what makes organizations both adaptive and high performing or functional. So it is a very good practical book, and you don't, in order to benefit from that book, you don't need to implement this whole self-management system. It's just a really good kind of engagement framework. Okay.
Tim, the author's Neil Doshi.
Okay, that's awesome. Thanks, Mike. And I'm just kind of going through the questions here. So Hardy Gerald is asking, how would you upskill framework proposition and positioning be best out across to engage during this great resignation, great reshuffle times? Or like, so I'm not sure, Hardy, if there's maybe maybe Jacob Hardy could unmute or something and maybe ask his question so we just understand it a little more clearly. Okay, while we're sorting out Hardy, I'm going to go to a question from Avanish from Compunel. And the question is actually a sales question, which is really important. So from a core sales perspective, what different approach did you and your team take to engage with professionals in command to build up business synergy? So how do we do sales? And then Hardy, we'll get to you in just a sec.
Great. Maybe I can take that one, Tim. So a number of years ago, we really identified bringing clients, salespeople, delivery, as well as our back office processes, all kind of in an alignment, and we called it a client-centric model. And we found that when teams are focused on whether it's specific clients or regions, they really perform better. And so we kind of built that model in one region, and then we expanded out across the entire enterprise. And we've seen tremendous success, tremendous engagement, and mostly a stronger relationship between our clients and ourselves. Internally, the relationship between sales and delivery, as well as back office, really brought efficiencies and productivity gains as well, which really helped also building up the momentum and synergy throughout the organization. So I would say that was one of the biggest pieces that we did a number of years ago, was that client-centric model.
And Anissa, I'm going to kind of spring this one on you as well, rather than only from a sales perspective. Maybe you could just talk about, working in recruiting, how your experience has kind of changed of the day-to-day from working this way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with recruitment and working this way, especially through the Great Resignation, it's been quite interesting in the sense that, there's a lot of candidates out there. There's a lot of shuffling going on, and recruiting's been quite busy, so to speak. Every day has been a little bit crazy, but I think, in terms of the Great Big Resignation, we're actively recruiting a lot more candidates. There's a lot of shift. There's a lot of changes. There's a lot of processes that are changing also from a recruitment perspective of, signing bonuses and things that we didn't really do as much before. So it's been quite a change.
That's awesome. Okay, Hardy, do you want to jump in here and ask your question?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you very much. So what I really meant was, in the current times when we try and engage with the employees, especially when they are attracting so much, and then there is anxiety amongst them, and they're leaving every 2 years, as we spoke earlier. Is there a way that we engage with them, try to show them a trajectory of growth, and tell them that, hey, you are at X level, and you need to be, let's say, at X plus level. So these are the trainings you can take, these are the engagements you can do with us as an organization, these are the processes you can learn where you have a delta or there's an improvement opportunity. And probably that kind of engagement, rather than just calling them on while mental wellness and other factors are there. But I think if we engage them on a different tangent, do you think it's going to help a little more for them to be staying with us and looking at a longer term perspective rather than finding a job quicker? So that was my question. Did I make myself a little clear?
Yeah, Shelley or Anissa, do you guys have a perspective on that? Still thinking?
Still thinking. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I can just pitch
Go ahead,
in
Mike.
here. So my thought is, I think this ultimately, and where we've got one of the lowest turnovers in the entire staffing industry. Like, it's very, very low. I'm going to say, call it less than 10%. And I think ultimately it's because we've empowered people to be able to take responsibility for their roles within the organization. We've implemented a process called the role advice process. So if somebody sees that there's an opportunity that they can add value doing some other role within the organization, they can go through, again, a process to seek advice and to really build out a role for them that will add greater value and hopefully more meaningful work for them. And so to me, these are just some of the things. So it's really about empowering your employees, because at the end of the day, if your employees are just not comfortable and they're not being treated fairly, they're going to leave. You need to keep them engaged, but ultimately they want to have the responsibility in their own hands. And so I think you need to empower them in order to keep the turnover low.
Thank you so very much for that answer. That really helps. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I'm going to just jump in for one sec too, Hardy, with and add to that word empower that Mike used. And I think this is kind of, again, for someone in a leadership position like yourself, the real trick here is actually to empower means to give away power and authority, and to make it clear for people that it's safe for them to take initiative, right? If I can't, Jacob, I don't know if you could hide on my screen Hardy's question. It's great that it's there, but I can't click. Okay, awesome. Now I can go back to here. If we go back to Dan Pink's motivational model, what he's saying is people need, purpose. They need mastery in their jobs. They need a sense of purpose. Like what is it? What's the inspiring purpose of your organization? But autonomy is like actually giving away your power to them, and kind of flipping that power dynamic on its head. And so we use the word empower, but it truly means you giving up power. And teaching and structuring people to learn how to use their authority, the power that you've given them, to take initiative and develop their careers, right? And so there's a number of kind of training things, there's a number of materials to do, but at our company, one thing you had asked is, can you create a career ladder for people? At our company, we actually don't do that. We actually tell them it's your responsibility to create your career ladder. It's your responsibility to create the things that you will see and find as motivating, and it's our responsibility to support that. So it's really just turning that entire paradigm structurally on its head and kind of doing the opposite of what we've all been trained in, the habits that we've all developed.
Awesome. Thank you so very
that's
much.
Helpful.
Very
Okay. So anything else, Anissa or Shelley, you want to add to that before we move to the next question? I think we're kind of almost down to the final question here.
No, all good on my end.
All good as well.
Okay. Actually, I'm going to go to Lena. So in the backdrop of this system, how should we advise the executive and C-level suite candidates with respect to potential companies they might be interested in? Okay, so I think the question, I'm not sure if the question is about recruiting other executives or if the question, which we're probably is a little off topic, but I think the way I'm going to take the question is, let's say you're working in an organization and you're feeling, connected or inspired by some of the things that we've talked about here. how can you, take some of those ideas to senior executives in your company to encourage them to think about these things. What do you think? If you guys were, well, Anissa, you worked at another place briefly recently. What would you have done to to try to encourage or open the eyes of the folks you were working with, the senior leaders at your organization? Anissa took a short break from our company and worked at another company and then came back recently as well. So maybe you can help us with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. So I had left Raise for a short 3 months and realized that it wasn't for me and came right back. And so I think, when you're advising executives or C-level suite candidates with respect to potential companies they might be interested in, it's very interesting to see this sort of dynamic versus a self-managed environment. And I think that there's a lot of engagement when it comes to recruitment in a self-managed environment, if that makes sense. And so with executives and C-level suites, it's the opportunity, I think, from a self-management environment to work on things outside of your own bubble and what you're used to. It's the ability to work on different processes, work with different people, develop different foundations and processes that they might be interested in, that they don't even know that they're interested in because they're so used to doing one thing their entire career, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I answered your question, Lena. If I didn't, feel free to rewrite it in the Q&A box, but I hope I was able to answer that okay.
Shelley, I'm going to go to you quickly too. I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot, but just having worked somewhere else recently, if you were to go back and advise senior people at that company, or if you've talked to any of them, like what would you say? What would you have said?
And right now it's an interesting conversation as, old colleagues reach out and I try to explain to them, yes, I've gone to a place where I don't have a boss, and they, kind of give me this funny look. But I think there are things that as people we typically will seek in the workplace. One is transparency, and the other is that piece of autonomy, and talking about what the implications of that look like and the positive outcomes of that, I think, is a good place to start the conversation. I use the example when I'm speaking to former colleagues of, I can actually see the process that went through in determining that my role, which is a newly created role, was established for me to even, be able to engage with Raise to become a part of the team. And I don't know anywhere else you would be able to actually see how that happened, like actually in writing and people's comments and feedback around the need or no need for it. So while it might be scary to have that level of transparency, it's really, it does create a trickle-down effect of empowerment. And you do see positive impact, even as, I was a former people leader. I led teams, and showing that you can actually spread that decision making and actually have a more collaborative environment actually is a huge positive. And I think people who are feeling the wear of managing people would actually be keen to this.
That's awesome, Shelley. I think, Mike, so we're going to wrap up, but is there anything more that you would say? Like, what would you say to an executive to kind of try to encourage them about moving this direction?
I would say don't be scared of it. I would say embrace it. It is definitely something different from an approach perspective, but the benefits absolutely outweigh. If I've taken a look at where our company's gone, when I joined, when Tim, you started taking over as the CEO of the organization, we started at the same time. We were a very siloed based organization. And the move that we needed to make next was really moving to a more culture-based organization. And so we have been constantly evolving. And this is really where we are today with kind of the Teal operating system, et cetera. I think it has now really empowered, as I mentioned earlier, and as everybody's mentioned, it's empowered our employees to really take responsibility for their own careers. And again, as the organization, to really support our employees. And I think it's important, if we support our employees, number one, they will take care of our clients, they will take care of our candidates. And so I think that's the support mechanism that's there. And so to me, moving to this model, it really does provide that mechanism for organization to be much more nimbler and much more agile in an ever-changing environment that really the staffing industry's become.
Awesome. Okay, cool. And Lena's put in some of her thoughts into the Q&A, which folks can read too, because she's got some perspective there, which is awesome. All right. Well, amazingly, we're just at an hour and we got through almost all the questions. So I'm just going to do one more quick thing to wrap up. And I thought folks might be interested, if in some additional resources if they were going to look at implementing this system. So these are some books that are useful. There's a book called The Decision Maker, which basically just helps you to structure. Mike mentioned something called the advice process. So without changing to a self-managing company, still having managers in place, the author of this book was able through M&A to grow from a company of 10 employees to a company of 100,000 employees. They were in the power generation space over like a couple of decades. And so he's got a really simple book. It's kind of one of those business fable books, and it kind of teaches you how to implement something called the advice process into your existing organization. And so that will have an immediate benefit around kind of engagement and connection with folks. As Mike mentioned as well, and my email is there, implementing the feedback process with a book called Feedback That Works, and potentially working with Tim Arnold at Leaders for Leaders is an amazing also first step. I didn't include that one. If you want to dig a little deeper into self-management and kind of get into the philosophy and read about other companies that are doing it, there's a book that covers 12 different companies that are doing this. It's really inspiring, called Reinventing Organizations. I would highly recommend the illustrated version, which I know sounds silly, but it's still packed with content. And it's really beautiful, and it's not over the top in terms of the textbook version is a bit much, I think, for most folks, and really all the content is there in the illustrated version. So I would really recommend that. If you're at the point where as an organization, you are going to do a full implementation and rollout, I wish we had this book. We ended up building a system that works almost exactly the same way as is suggested in the book Brave New Work. And they talk about the 12 areas of your business that you need to adapt in order to make this functional, and kind of give you steps for how to pick which area to start with and how to move through it all. And lastly, I think you can see that we're really passionate about this as an organization. I'm personally extremely passionate about this. I feel like it's connected to my sense of purpose and calling, and I really want in our industry to help expand this model so that more people can feel like their work is meaningful and connected. And I have a model for ownership transitions and exits that's connected to employees moving into employee ownership and supported by our company. That I am sort of putting myself out there and making myself available to talk with owners around, both financing those kinds of transitions, and then also help giving the transitional supports to help employees learn how to lead and manage the business for themselves. So if you are an owner or a CEO that's looking to move further, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to spend some time with you, and we could just have a chat for an hour. So reach out to me at tmasson@raiserecruiting.com, and let's build a movement of employee ownership and self-management in our industry. Thanks so much, guys, and have a great conference.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.